What if everything you thought about talent was fundamentally wrong? What if elite performance isn't some, mysterious gift you're born with, but actually a skill you can consciously build day by day, connection by connection? That's the really transformative idea we're digging into today. We're unpacking The Little Book of Talent by Daniel Coyle. Coyle's journey for this book, it led him to some truly unexpected places, what he calls talent hotbeds. Imagine a ramshackle Moscow tennis club, or maybe a humble music camp up in the Adirondacks, or even an inner-city charter school in San Mateo. The really shocking thing, what they all had in common, they were all producing just an astonishing number of world-class performers. And Coyle's discovery, after years of watching, was, well, pretty surprising. Talent isn't primarily genetic. That's not the main driver. Instead, he found it determined by intensive practice and motivation that produces brain growth.
Yeah, and this isn't just, a philosophy or some nice idea. It's actually grounded in some fascinating neuroscience. The real sort of unsung hero behind this brain growth. It's a substance called myelin. Think of myelin like insulation around an electrical wire. That's a good analogy. It wraps around the neural pathways in our brain, those wires sending signals, and it makes those signals travel much, much faster and with more accuracy. What's really compelling here is that what we often call muscle memory, it actually has very little to do with your muscles at all. It's really your brain developing, specifically through the growth of this myelin, and that growth happens in direct response to electrical activity, which is, practice. Every single rep, every focused effort, it literally adds another layer of myelin to those crucial brain circuits.
Wow. So for you listening, our mission today is to kind of cut through the noise. We want to distill the most potent, practical, and scientifically sound tips from Coyle's work. We want to arm you with a sort of pocket-sized master coach for really developing your talents no matter where you're starting from. We'll look at the spark, what ignites the skill journey, how to really optimize your practice, and maybe most importantly, how do you sustain that progress? How do you keep going for the long haul? Okay, so let's dive into that first crucial step, just getting started. How do you even begin to build a new skill? Coyle argues it all starts with a spark, an ignition, he calls it. And that ignition often comes from intensely focusing on who you aspire to be. He calls it staring, not just like passive watching. But that really absorbed gaze, like a hungry cat watching a bird. He says, literally fill your mental windshield with vivid images of your future skilled self. Think about the Seri Pak effect in South Korean Gauls. It's a great example. Before 1997, you'd find almost no South Koreans on the LPG tour, hardly any. Then Seri Pak wins 2 major tournaments in '98. And suddenly, it wasn't just a few. Hundreds of South Korean girls were ignited. They started thinking, hey, if she can do it, why can't I? Even Green Berets, they boosted leadership skills just by watching high-performing GE executives work, just observing.
It's really fascinating because studies actually show that even a brief connection, something seemingly small, with a role model, it can dramatically increase your unconscious motivation. For example, there was this one study just telling people they shared a birthday with a famous mathematician. That actually improved the effort they put into hard math tasks by 62%. Incredible. It's about that subconscious identification. It gives you this powerful internal drive.
Right. And building on that spark, Coyle then talks about actively absorbing the skill. His idea is engraving the skill on your brain, spending focused time watching or listening really closely to build what he calls a high-definition mental blueprint. There's this brilliant story, I think it was on 60 Minutes, about a tennis teacher, Timothy Galway. He got a group of people who'd never played, picked out the woman he thought had the least potential, and without saying a word, just hit forehands while she watched, really watched. His feet, his grip, the rhythm. And within 20 minutes, she was hitting a shockingly decent forehand, just from watching. This is also, a core principle of the Suzuki method in music. That daily listening practice, it literally helps engrave the songs onto the brain.
Exactly. And for physical skills, you're not just watching passively. You're projecting yourself inside the performer's body, trying to sense their movement, their rhythm, feel the shape of the moves from the inside out. For mental skills, it's more about simulating decision patterns, like how a chess grandmaster might replay classic games move by move, internalizing the strategy. Or a writer retyping great novels just to feel the flow, the structure. It's about building that mental model through really intense observational immersion.
And from that mental blueprint, Coyle throws out this really provocative idea, steal without apology. We're also told, that talent is some innate thing, natural instinct. that people just have it.
Yeah.
Coyle says that's basically baloney. He argues all significant improvement comes from actively absorbing and applying new information. From top performers. Think about Steve Jobs, right? He famously stole the idea for the computer mouse drop-down menus from Xerox. Or the Beatles' iconic "Woo!" They lifted that straight from Little Richard. Even Babe Ruth based his mighty swing on shoeless Joe Jackson's swing. Linda Septin, who founded a pop music talent hotbed, she tells her students, "Sweetheart, you gotta steal like crazy."
And what's really crucial here, the key thing, is that you focus on specifics, not just, general impressions. It's not just saying, oh, I want to swing like Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
It's asking, okay, what's the exact angle of his elbow at the top of his backswing? Or for a singer, what's the precise shape of their lips when they hit that high note? Specifics. That specific targeted observation lets you truly internalize and then replicate the mechanics. It also helps explain why sometimes younger siblings in musical families end up more talented. They just have more access to information, more opportunity for this kind of subtle, ongoing theft from their older siblings.
Okay, so beyond the spark and observation, Coyle gets into the mindset, the environment you need. Foundational stuff. First, you have to be willing to be stupid. Well, but feeling stupid is no fun, right? Nobody likes it. It often feels like failing. But Coyle insists that being willing to risk that emotional pain, making mistakes, is absolutely essential. You have to risk it. That whole act of reaching, failing, then reaching again, that's precisely how your brain grows new connections. Even someone like Wayne Gretzky, legendary, right? He'd occasionally fall down during his solitary hockey drills.
Right, and this really highlights a concept psychologists call productive mistakes. They're actually good for learning. At places like the Meadowmount School of Music, for example, there's this kind of informal rule. If someone walking by can actually recognize the song you're playing it too fast. It forces students into this super exaggerated slowness, which immediately reveals tiny errors they might otherwise just gloss over. Businesses like Google, they had their 20% time for, projects outside the main job. And Living Social apparently had a rule, once a week, you should make a decision at work that scares you. Point is, mistakes aren't verdicts on your ability. They're valuable guideposts. They actively prompt your brain to adjust.
And here's where Coyle offers a really counterintuitive insight about the learning environment. Choose Spartan over luxurious. We naturally think, better facilities, more comfort, that must be better for learning, right? State-of-the-art stuff. But Coyle argues that luxury is a motivational narcotic. It subtly signals your unconscious mind to just relax. It kind of whispers, hey, relax, you've already made it. So look at those chicken wire Harvards he talks about. Spartak, that famous underfunded Moscow tennis club. The North Baltimore Aquatic Club, which produced Michael Phelps in pretty modest facilities. Or those really austere classrooms in top-performing Finnish and South Korean schools. They are definitely not luxurious.
And this is a crucial neural point he's making. It's not a moral judgment. Simple, even kind of humble spaces. They help focus your attention directly on the task, the deep practice task. Reaching, repeating, struggling. When there are fewer external comforts or distractions, your brain is just forced to concentrate more intensely on the skill itself. It really optimizes the conditions for that myelin growth we talked about.
Okay, so before you even get too deep into the actual practice, Coyle says you need to understand the nature of what you're building. He suggests you figure out if it's a hard skill or soft skill. Two types. Hard, high-precision skills. Those are actions you perform as correctly and consistently as possible every single time. Like a golfer's swing. Basic multiplication facts. A violinist playing a specific chord perfectly in tune. They're about repeatable precision. They function almost like a Swiss watch. In contrast, you have soft, high flexibility skills. These are where there are many paths to a good result. It's about being agile, interactive, quickly recognizing patterns, like a soccer player sensing a weakness in the defense and exploiting it, or a stock trader spotting an opportunity, or a CEO just reading a room.
Exactly. And what's compelling about this distinction, why it matters, is that these two skill types actually use different brain circuits. And because of that, they demand fundamentally different practice methods. You can't practice them the same way. Here's a quick litmus test Coyle suggests to help tell them apart. If a teacher or a coach is typically involved providing direct, prescriptive instruction, especially early on, it's most likely a hard skill. If the learning feels more about exploration, adaptation, figuring things out as you go, it probably leans towards a soft skill.
Right. So when it comes to those hard skills, Coyle advises you to work like a careful carpenter. This means focusing on precision, executing slowly, and paying really keen attention to errors. Every little detail matters. Think of the Suzuki music method again. Students spend entire lessons just learning to hold the bow and violin with meticulous precision. They even use playful rhymes like up like a rocket, down like the rain to embed the exact motion. Every fundamental is treated as supremely important. Or consider Tom Brady. Even late in his career, he apparently still carried a handwritten list of fundamental throwing keys, and he'd visit his coach yearly for what he called a repaving of his neural highways, constantly reinforcing the basics.
Yeah, and this really connects to what neuroscientists sometimes call the sled on a snowy hill phenomenon in the brain. The very first repetitions you make for a new skill, they literally carve out neural pathways. And those pathways, once they're laid down, are incredibly difficult to unbuild later if they were formed incorrectly. It's like grooves. This makes that early precision absolutely crucial because you are quite literally laying down the fundamental neural blueprint for the skill. Get it right early.
Okay, but in stark contrast, to build those soft skills, Coyle encourages you to play like a skateboarder. These skills, like, watching Lionel Messi improvise on the soccer field, they often look magical, almost effortless.
Yeah.
But Coyle argues they actually stem from super fast brain software developed through practice. So unlike the careful, precise carpenter approach for hard skills, soft skills are built by playing and exploring inside challenging, ever-changing environments.
Yeah.
You need that dynamic element. Look at Brazil's Futebol de Salão. It's this small field soccer game played in really cramped spaces. It generates something like 600% more touches per player compared to regular soccer. It acts as a kind of laboratory of improvisation. Or think of Chicago's Second City comedy troupe. They build incredible comedic talent through endless spontaneous improvisation games and exercises.
And it's interesting because even the most creative, fluid skills, they almost always require long periods of clumsiness early on. It doesn't start out smooth. The Bronte sisters, for instance, the famous novelists, they built their world-class writing skills by churning out thousands and thousands of pages of early stories when they were kids. A lot of it probably wasn't very good. But it was through that extensive, varied, playful exploration that their abilities really grew and solidified.
Now, here's a really important point Coyle stresses. Honor the hard skills. Most talents, in reality, they combine both, right? Hard and soft skills working together. A violinist needs precise finger placement. That's hard. And the ability to interpret emotion. That's soft. A quarterback needs an accurate spiral. Hard. And the ability to read a changing defense. Soft. But Coyle argues you should always prioritize the hard skills first. They are the absolute foundation. You need them. At Spartak, that Moscow tennis club, young players had a rule. Practice for 3 full years before playing competitive tournaments. Because, as they said, technique is everything. Get the fundamentals perfect first. Even elite performers, like the cellist Yo-Yo Ma or NFL quarterback Peyton Manning, they still meticulously practice basic fundamentals every single day. Coyle uses this great analogy. Talent is like an oak tree. The hard skills are the massive, thick trunk, and the soft skills are the towering canopy. You simply have to build that strong trunk first. And speaking of talent, Coyle issues a really clear warning. Don't fall for the prodigy myth. We often assume that early, effortless success is the surest sign of real talent. Like, wow, they're a natural. Got me. But the research, Coyle points out, consistently shows it's actually a pretty weak predictor of long-term success. So many top performers were overlooked or really struggled early on. Michael Jordan was famously cut from his high school varsity team. Charles Darwin was considered pretty ordinary as a kid. Walt Disney was even fired from a newspaper job for lacking imagination. Can you believe that?
That's such a critical insight, and it raises a really important question. Why? Why do early prodigies often seem to fizzle out later? Dr. Carol Dweck's research offers a compelling explanation. She suggests that all that early praise for natural talent can actually lead prodigies to try and protect their magical status. How? By taking fewer risks. They don't want to fail and look less talented, which ironically ends up stifling their learning and growth in the long run. Anson Dorrance, the incredibly successful North Carolina women's soccer coach, he sums it up perfectly. He observes that it's the humble, hardworking girl who consistently outperforms the initially dazzling but ultimately fizzled out prodigy over time. Persistence beats early flash.
Right. And as you start on this journey, you'll probably need some guidance. A good teacher or coach is invaluable. Coyle dedicates a whole section to picking a high-quality teacher or coach, calling them a rare species, hard to find. He highlights a few key qualities to look for. First, he says, avoid someone who reminds you of a courteous waiter. Someone whose main focus is just making you comfortable, keeping you happy.
Yeah, not challenging you.
Exactly. Second, and this might sound strange, seek someone who scares you a little. These coaches, they watch you really closely, they're action-oriented, and they are, quote, unnervingly honest about your performance, even when it's tough to hear.
It's interesting. The word coach itself, where it came from, it's from kocsai, which is the Hungarian word for a horse-drawn carriage. So the original meaning is someone who helps you take a journey, who gets you from point A to point B. So you're looking for someone solid, right? Someone you can actually trust to guide you through what's often a challenging process. A really high quality coach isn't just there to make you feel good, they're there to help you effectively get somewhere.
Makes sense. Third, Coyle says, seek someone who gives short, clear directions. Think of John Wooden, maybe one of the greatest basketball coaches ever. His average comment during practice was only 4 seconds long. Short, specific bursts. Fourth, seek someone who loves teaching fundamentals. They get that these are the absolute core of your skills. They don't skip over them. And finally, Coyle suggests, other things being equal, pick the older person. Like any deep talent, teaching itself takes time to grow and mature, which is probably why many of these talent hotbeds are led by really seasoned individuals, often in their 60s or 70s. Experience counts. Okay, so we've laid that essential groundwork, right? Igniting the skill journey, understanding hard versus soft skills, finding good guidance. So how do you make the most progress in the least amount of time once you start practicing? It all really centers on one profound idea: deep practice. This isn't just mindless repetition, okay? It's a specific intentional kind of effort, the kind that truly builds those myelin layers we talked about and literally reshapes your brain. And at the very heart of deep practice is what Coyle calls the sweet spot. This is that zone right on the edge of your ability. It's where learning happens fastest. It often feels like, well, frustration, difficulty. You feel really alert to your errors, and typically you're succeeding maybe 50 to 80% of the time. Not perfect, but not failing constantly either. There's this really powerful story Coyle tells about Clarissa, a 13-year-old clarinet player. She was pretty average, apparently. But one morning, she learned a month's worth of material in just 5 minutes. 5 minutes? How? She just instinctively froze whenever she made a mistake. She'd stop, peer at the music, hum the notes, rehearse the fingering silently, then start again right before the mistake. She was actively building her brain, welding the right connections, right there in her sweet spot.
That really aligns perfectly with something Albert Einstein once said. One must develop an instinct for what one can just barely achieve through one's greatest efforts. The key word there is barely. That's the sweet spot. You're constantly pushing right up against that boundary, identifying where you're just on the cusp of mastery, because that's precisely where the most significant neural growth occurs. That's the zone.
And as you're working in that sweet spot, Coyle urges you, take off your watch. Deep practice isn't really measured in minutes or hours long. It's not about time. It's measured in the number of high-quality reaches and repetitions. The effort counts. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to practice piano for 20 minutes, maybe tell yourself I'm going to do 5 really intensive reps of that tricky new song passage. Focus on the quality of the effort, not just the time spent sitting there. This also connects directly to his advice to choose 5 minutes a day over an hour a week. Small daily practice snacks are way more effective than trying to cram it all into one big weekly binge session. Our brains grow incrementally, right? They actually nourish those new neural circuits even while we sleep. So daily practice optimizes this natural growth process. As the music education pioneer Shinichi Suzuki famously put it, practice on the days that you eat, basically every day.
Precisely. And there's a great example of this. A medical student who learned a really complex piano etude in just 6 weeks. How much practice? Only 2 minutes a day. But it was highly focused practice. The brain just thrives on that consistent incremental input. And daily practice also does something else really crucial. It helps establish the habit of practicing. Psychologists say it takes about 30 days, give or take, for a new habit to really solidify. Once it's a habit, sustained effort becomes far easier over the long term.
Okay, another essential strategy for deep practice. Break every move down into chunks. Coyle defines chunks as the smallest single element of a skill you can isolate. Think of them like letters are to language, the basic building blocks. Musicians at the Meadowmount School, for instance, they literally cut musical scores into tiny pieces on paper. They learn each little piece individually, get it perfect, and then they systematically start combining them back together.
Yeah, this chunking process is really systematic. It follows a clear pattern. First, you see the whole thing, get the big picture, then break it down to its simplest elements, the smallest possible chunks. Then put it back together, linking the chunks, and finally repeat over and over. This ensures you achieve mastery at every single granular level, creating really robust neural connections for each chunk before you link them into larger, more complex sequences.
Right, and from that idea, Coyle suggests that each day you should aim to build one perfect chunk. He calls this the daily SAP, smallest achievable perfection. I like that. You pick just one single tiny chunk of the skill, and you commit to perfecting just that one piece, aiming for 100% consistency with it. It really echoes John Wooden's wisdom again. Never mistake mere activity for accomplishment, and also, don't look for the big, quick improvement. Seek the small improvement one day at a time. Little wins add up. Now, this requires you to embrace struggle. You have to be okay with it feeling hard, because deep practice has this very distinct emotional flavor, Coyle says, and that feeling, it is struggle. Well, an instinct is usually to avoid it, right? Because it feels like failure, like we're not getting it. Coyle insists it's actually a biological necessity. It's the very sensation of new neural connections actively forming and strengthening.
Absolutely. UCLA psychologist Robert Bjork has a great term for this: desirable difficulty.
It's a bit like building muscles, isn't it? The old saying, no pain, no gain. That struggle, that feeling of difficulty. It's the brain's signal that it's actively growing and adapting. It's literally rewiring itself to accommodate the new information or movements you're feeding it. It's actually a positive indicator that you're right in that sweet spot where real, meaningful learning is happening.
And to keep things engaging, because struggle isn't always fun, Coyle advises, don't do drills. Instead, play small, addictive games. This is about changing the perception of practice, right? Moving it away from feeling like drudgery towards something infused with fun, connectedness, maybe even a bit of passion. Think of Rory McIlroy as a kid, chipping golf balls into his parents' washing machine dryer opening, turning practice into a target game. Or Warren Buffett as a young boy, meticulously tracking which flavor of chewing gum sold best in his neighborhood, turning observation into a data game. The governing principle here is actually quite simple and powerful. If it can be counted, it can be turned into a game. So, for example, counting how many perfect guitar chords you can play in a row. That immediately transforms what could be a repetitive, boring exercise into a point-scoring activity. It inherently increases your engagement and motivation just by adding that game element.
And when it comes to really focused effort, Coyle makes a strong case to practice alone. Solo practice, he argues, is arguably the best environment for finding that crucial sweet spot and developing genuine self-discipline. Because you're not relying on others for feedback or energy or motivation. It has to come from within. There was a classic study he cites that found world-class performers spent 5 times as many hours practicing alone compared to top amateurs.
5 times.
Yeah, it really speaks to the deep internal work that's required for mastery. Anton Dorrance, that North Carolina women's soccer coach again, he once said something powerful. The vision of a champion is someone who is bent over, drenched in sweat, at the point of exhaustion when no one else is watching. That really captures the essence of truly focused, individual effort driven purely by internal motivation and discipline.
Okay, now let's shift a bit and explore how to optimize your mental and sensory engagement during practice. This is key. Coyle recommends you think in images. Use mental pictures. Think about it. Which instruction is easier to remember and execute? Take the racket back in a straight horizontal line parallel to the ground, or take the tennis racket back as if you were sweeping dishes off a low coffee table.
The image, right?
Much clearer. Exactly. The image is far more vivid, more memorable, because our brains evolved to register and process images much more effectively than abstract words or concepts. And when you inevitably make those mistakes, because you will if you're in the sweet spot, Coyle urges you, pay attention immediately after you make a mistake. Our natural instinct is often to wince, look away, maybe mutter something negative, basically. Avoid confronting the failure. But Coyle says this is profoundly counterproductive for learning.
Right. And brain scan studies are actually quite clear on this. They've pinpointed this vital instant. It's about 0.25 seconds after you make a mistake, a quarter of a second. In that tiny window, paying focused attention leads to significantly more learning than if you ignore it or tune out. It's like a window of heightened neural plasticity opens up, where your brain is primed to immediately update its internal model based on the error. So the advice is stark, but crucial. Don't wince, don't close your eyes, look straight at them and look at the mistake. And also, take mistakes seriously, meaning analyze them, but never personally. They're just feedback. Your brain's crucial signals for improvement.
And to really solidify this positive view of errors, Coyle encourages you to actually visualize the wires of your brain forming new connections when you make those productive mistakes, and then correct them. Actively reframe those mistakes in your mind. They're not failures. They are literal tools for building skill as you fix them. And then take it a step further. Visualize the wires of your brain getting faster. With deep practice, Coyle explains, the signal speeds in your brain circuits can actually increase dramatically. from maybe a sluggish 2 miles per hour up to an astonishing 200 miles per hour.
Wow.
So visualizing your pathways, transforming from like simple copper wires to high-speed broadband, that's a powerful motivator because it's literally what's happening inside your head.
And this is where myelin comes right back into the picture, isn't it? That visualization is directly aligning with the biological process. Myelin wrapping around those neural axons, increasing the speed and efficiency of signal transmission. You are quite literally making your brain faster and more accurate through this kind of focused visualization in practice.
Okay. For a really simple yet surprisingly powerful technique to deepen practice, Coyle just says, close your eyes. It seems almost too simple, right? But it immediately removes visual distractions. It kind of nudges you right to the edges of your ability, forcing you to rely on feel, and it engages your other senses, giving you new kinds of feedback you might miss otherwise. Michael Jordan famously practiced free throws with his eyes shut sometimes. And Navy SEAL training includes things like disassembling weapons completely in the dark. Similarly, Coyle mentions mime it, doing practices that might look a bit crazy to outsiders, like a golfer swinging at empty air, focusing only on the motion, or a pianist practicing fingerings on a tabletop.
Right, but by removing everything except the essential action, whether that's closing your eyes or miming the motion, you're able to focus with laser-like intensity on making the right reach, on perfecting the internal feeling of the motion itself. Without getting caught up in external variables like hitting the ball or the sound of the keys, it forces a heightened internal awareness.
Coyle also has some really powerful insights on optimizing your learning cycles and how you use feedback. For instance, when you finally get a rep right, nail it perfectly. He says, mark the spot. Ho! Don't just rush on, freeze right after that perfect rep. Rewind the mental tape, so to speak, and really memorize the precise feeling of that successful execution. Lock it in.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Kimberly Myers-Thames, who works at the SETA Center for Suzuki Studies. She says, practice begins when you get it right. That perfect rep isn't the finish line for that chunk. It's actually your new starting line. It becomes the blueprint, the target feeling you're now aiming to replicate consistently.
And here's one that might be a favorite for many listeners, yet it's highly effective. Take a nap.
Mm.
This is apparently quite common in talent hotbeds. And there's plenty of anecdotal evidence, right, from intellectual giants like Einstein and Da Vinci to top professional athletes who swear by naps.
And it's not just anecdote anymore. There's solid science behind it. Research from the University of California, Berkeley, for example, showed that taking a 90-minute nap actually improved memory recall related to recent learning by about 10%. Naps seem to strengthen the neural connections formed during practice. They help consolidate the learning, and they also prepare the brain to absorb more learning afterward. So napping isn't just rest. It's an active and crucial part of the learning process itself.
Okay, another technique. To learn a new move deeply, Coyle suggests you exaggerate it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how parents often teach babies new words. They stretch out the sounds, right? Ba. Coyle says going too far with a movement helps you understand the true boundaries and nuances. Feel the edges. It makes it easier to then dial it back to perfection because you know what too much feels like. And kind of related to that, he advises always make positive reaches.
Mm-hmm.
When you're faced with a choice in execution, focus mentally on what you want to do. For example, thinking center the stroke for a golf putt, rather than focusing on what you want to avoid, like don't pull this putt.
Yeah, this is often referred to in psychology as positive framing.
Yeah.
And it has a surprisingly powerful effect on your subconscious mind and ultimately your actions. It works because it guides your system directly toward the desired outcome by providing clear, constructive directives rather than focusing attention on the potential error.
Now, for those of you who learn from books or written material, Coyle offers this powerful challenge. To learn from a book, close the book. He poses a thought experiment. Imagine you have 30 minutes to study for a test covering 10 pages of text. Would you just passively read the 10 pages 4 times? Or would you read them carefully just once and then spend the rest of the time trying to write a one-page summary from memory?
The summary method, right? Active recall.
Exactly. Research shows that summary method, the active recall, leads to remembering about 50% more material later on compared to just passive rereading.
And the core rule here, the underlying principle, is simple but really profound. Learning is reaching. You have to actively retrieve the information. Passively rereading, highlighting, it doesn't really put you in that active, effortful sweet spot. Less reaching simply equals less learning. Actively recalling, summarizing, trying to explain it to someone else, that forces those crucial neural connections to be made and strengthened.
Okay, what if you're trying to correct a specific nagging mistake? Coyle suggests trying the sandwich technique.
Yeah.
The sequence is, first, make the correct move. Feel it. Then, deliberately make the incorrect move you're trying to fix. Isolate it. Then immediately follow it with the correct move again. Reinforce the good one.
It sounds a bit strange, maybe making the mistake on purpose, but the goal here is twofold. First, to vividly reinforce the feeling of the correct move right after the incorrect one. And second, to spotlight the incorrect move, make it conscious so you're less likely to slip back into it automatically. It's a very intentional form of error correction, making the contrast really clear to your brain.
And tapping into some interesting neurological research, Coyle highlights what he calls the 3x10 technique. This comes from Dr. Douglas Fields at the National Institutes of Health. His research found that our brains seem to make stronger, more lasting connections when a neural circuit is stimulated 3 times, with about 10-minute rest periods in between each stimulation. 3 reps with breaks.
Yeah, this technique really taps into the fundamental way our brains actually consolidate learning and build memory. Those 10-minute breaks aren't just downtime or wasted time. They appear to be essential processing periods where your brain is actively strengthening the new connections that were forged during the intense work periods. It's about working with your brain's natural rhythm for memory formation and skill acquisition, not against it.
Okay, finally, to help you gauge the effectiveness of any practice method you're using or considering, Coyle introduces the REPS gauge. It's a simple framework, like a checklist, to measure how good your practice actually is. REPSR is for reaching and repeating. Are you constantly pushing to the edge of your ability? Are you getting many repetitions of that sweet spot reach? Or just cruising? E is for engagement. Are you intensely focused, actively involved in the task? Or are you just kind of going through the motions, mind wandering? P is for purposefulness. Is your practice designed to achieve specific, meaningful learning objectives? Does it simulate real-world conditions where possible? Or is it just abstract drilling? S is for strong, speedy feedback. Are you getting immediate, accurate feedback on your performance? Does it allow for rapid course correction and neural updating? Or is the feedback delayed or vague?
This REPS gauge, this sort of meta framework for evaluating practice itself, it's really critical, I think, because as Coyle emphasizes throughout the book, small changes in method can create large increases in learning velocity. Tiny adjustments can make a huge difference. It forces you, the learner, to design your practice intelligently and intentionally, rather than just defaulting to whatever feels comfortable or easy or what you've always done. It makes you think about how you practice.
Okay, so you've sparked the ignition, you've defived into these methods for optimized practice. Awesome. But how do you keep that fire lit for the long haul? This isn't a sprint, right? How do you overcome those inevitable plateaus? How do you maintain motivation when things get tough or boring? This section is really about navigating the cross-country hike of skill building, the long game. And maybe at the very foundation of long-term skill building is this principle: embrace repetition. Repetition might have a bad reputation in some circles, Sounds boring, like mindless drilling. But Coyle calls it the single most powerful lever we have to improve skills. It's essential. Think of Navy SEAL Team 6. Before the Bin Laden raid, they rehearsed it dozens of times. Every detail, over and over. Or consider Mo Norman, who many say was the most accurate golfer in history. His nickname was Pipeline Mo. He apparently hit 800 to 1,000 balls a day, just relentless repetition. It reminds me of that famous Bruce Lee quote: "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times."
That's such a crucial point because
Right.
repetition isn't just about drilling for the sake of drilling. It is the direct biological mechanism for making the wires of our brains faster and more accurate. Each effective, focused repetition directly contributes to that myelin growth we keep coming back to. It literally hardens the pathways for that specific skill, making it smoother, faster, more automatic.
And this deep commitment to repetition, it really requires a specific mindset. Coyle calls it, have a blue-collar mindset. Top performers, he notes, they aren't entitled. They don't expect things to be easy. They tend to have this 100% blue-collar approach, his words, meaning they get up in the morning and go to work every day whether they feel like it or not. It's about showing up. Like the artist Chuck Close famously said, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Here's a related point, maybe counterintuitive again, especially for competitive people, about long-term growth. Coyle suggests for every hour of competition, spend 5 hours practicing, a 5-to-1 ratio. Now, games and competitions are fun, right? And they provide valuable experience under pressure. But Coyle argues they can actually slow down fundamental skill development. Why? Well, several reasons. Competition often diminishes risk-taking. You play safe to win. It reduces the number of quality-focused reps you get on specific weaknesses. It can distort priorities, making you focus only on the score rather than on learning and improvement. And the feedback is often delayed or less specific than in practice. Remember Spartak, that Moscow tennis club? Young players were famously required to practice for 3 full years before competing in tournaments. Practice first.
That's a really fascinating ratio, 5-to-1. Or maybe even 10-to-1, he suggests. And while public competition certainly has its place, right, for testing skills, handling pressure, refining strategy, it's often a surprisingly inefficient way to actually improve fundamental skills. The concentrated, intentional, often solitary effort in deep practice, that allows for far more rapid and precise neural adjustments. So that high practice-to-performance ratio can be way more effective for building that strong foundational trunk of skill over the long term.
Okay, and as you move forward on this long journey, you'll inevitably encounter bad habits you want to change. Coyle offers some very practical advice here. Don't waste time trying to break bad habits. Instead, build new ones.
Oh.
His point is that our brains are incredibly good at building circuits, but they're actually awful at unbuilding them. Once they're there, they're kind of sticky.
Right, hard to erase.
Exactly. So the solution, he argues, isn't to fight the old habit directly. It's to basically ignore the bad habit and put all your energy toward building a new, positive habit that will eventually override the old one, create a better alternative pathway. He cites the example of a shyness clinic that uses a social fitness model. They start with really simple steps, like just asking a stranger for the time. And then they gradually escalate to more radical exercises, like dropping a watermelon in public, just to build social resilience and override ingrained shyness patterns.
This is incredibly insightful about how our brains actually function, especially regarding habits. Our neural pathways, once they're established and myelinated, they become quite robust, quite automatic. Trying to consciously erase them is often a frustrating and futile effort. Instead, the strategy is to create a stronger, more desirable alternative pathway that your brain learns to prefer, effectively bypassing the old one. And the advice, again, is to start slowly with the new habit, gradually increase the difficulty, allowing ample time for those new neural wires to build and solidify through consistent, correct repetitions. Patience is key here.
Now, here's another way to accelerate your own learning, especially for the long haul. To learn it more deeply, teach it. Coyle noticed that many talent hotbeds seem to employ this kind of open floor plan approach, where you have mixed age groups, allowing older, more experienced kids to naturally teach the younger ones. He saw this in places like Curacao baseball programs and in Montessori schools.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of learning, teaching a skill forces you to do several things that deepen your own mastery. You have to articulate the concepts clearly. You have to organize the information logically. You have to critically examine your own understanding to explain it effectively. All of which invariably deepens your own grasp of the subject. Plus, it fosters empathy, forces you to see it from another perspective. That old saying, those who can't do, teach. It really should be rewritten as, doers who teach do better. Teaching enhances doing.
And just to set some realistic expectations for progress, especially when starting something new, Coyle found a recurring pattern when looking at top training programs worldwide, from Navy SEALs BUDS training to the Bolshoi Ballet, even the original Mercury astronauts. They all seem to indicate a significant threshold for acquiring a new, complex skill set. Give a new skill a minimum of 8 weeks. Even studies on meditation show lasting brain changes start becoming evident after about 8 weeks of consistent daily practice.
Yeah, this 8-week marker really emphasizes that building robust, myelinated neural circuitry just takes dedicated time. It doesn't happen overnight. It also underscores the absolutely vital role of resilience and grit, especially in those challenging early phases of learning. You simply shouldn't make definitive judgments about your potential or about the effectiveness of your efforts too early in the process. Give it time, at least 8 weeks.
Okay, but what happens when you've been practicing diligently, maybe for months or years, and you just hit a wall? You stop improving, the dreaded plateau. Coyle says when you get stuck, make a shift. Don't just keep banging your head against the same wall. Plateaus, he explains, are often moments when your brain has kind of gone on autopilot. You're performing the skill competently, maybe even well, but you're not actively growing or refining anymore. You're stuck in a rut. I actually hit one recently with ping pong. My son started consistently beating me, which was frustrating. My solution, I started just hitting against the wall for practice. Totally different feel. It forced me to adjust to a much faster, more unpredictable pace, shaking up my timing and reactions.
And that aligns perfectly with Dr. K. Anders Ericsson's extensive research on expertise and deliberate practice. His findings show that the best way past a learning plateau is often to jostle yourself beyond it, as Coyle puts it, by deliberately changing your practice method. Mix it up somehow. Maybe speed way up or slow way down. Try reversing the order of operations. Turn the skill inside out somehow. The main goal is to disrupt that comfortable autopilot mode and force your brain back into a state of active engagement, seeking out new connections, finding new solutions. Shake things up.
And underpinning all of this, getting started, practicing deeply, pushing through plateaus, is the need to cultivate your grit. Coyle defines grit, borrowing from Angela Duckworth, as that potent mix of passion, perseverance, and self-discipline. It's sticking with things. Duckworth's famous West Point study showed that a simple 2-minute grit test administered to incoming cadets actually predicted who would successfully complete the grueling Beast Barracks summer training better than their IQ scores or high school GPAs. Grit mattered more.
And what's really compelling and hopeful about grit is that the research suggests it isn't some fixed inborn trait you either have or don't. It seems to be something that can be developed, much like a muscle can be strengthened with exercise. Cultivating it often starts with self-awareness, recognizing and celebrating your own moments of persistence, no matter how small they seem. That helps reinforce the behavior and builds momentum over time.
Okay, here's a really counterintuitive point, especially for people who like to share their ambitions. Keep your big goals secret. Coyle reveals this fascinating finding. Publicly announcing your big goals actually makes them less likely to happen.
Really? That seems backward.
Right. But a New York University experiment demonstrated this. Subjects who wrote down their goals but kept them quiet actually worked significantly longer and reported feeling more motivated, compared to subjects who wrote down their goals and then announced them to the experimenter.
So why would that be? What's the mechanism? Coyle explains it's because telling others about your goal can create a kind of unconscious payoff, a premature sense of accomplishment. Your brain, in this strange psychological twist, can be tricked into thinking the goal is already partly achieved, simply by receiving that social validation and recognition for announcing it, and then that initial burst of motivation can actually dissipate before the real hard work even begins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Finally, Coyle offers this really elegant summary, a kind of mantra for the long-term view of talent development. Think like a gardener, work like a carpenter.
Yeah, I love that saying. Coyle apparently heard it at Spartak, the tennis club, and it beautifully captures the dual mindset required for sustained skill growth. To think like a gardener means to think patiently, nurturingly, without harsh judgment, understanding that growth takes time, care, and the right conditions. Things don't bloom overnight. And then, to work like a carpenter means to work steadily, strategically, with precision, knowing that each piece of effort, each rep, each chunk connects to a larger whole, building methodically towards a specific, intentional outcome. It's really the perfect blend of patience and purposeful action needed for the long haul.
So, wrapping this up, we've taken a really deep dive today into the fascinating world of skill acquisition, and hopefully move far beyond that old, limiting idea of just innate, fixed giftedness. We've uncovered this powerful truth. Talent isn't merely inherited. It's not just in your genes. It's built, connection by connection, rep by rep, through intentional, focused, deep practice.
Exactly. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, what it really means is that your potential for significant skill development, for real growth, isn't ultimately limited by your genes or where you started or even how old you are. It's limited primarily by your willingness to engage in the specific actions that quite literally reshape your brain. Remember that core idea. Practice makes myelin, and myelin makes perfect, or at least much, much better.
So here's the final thought for you to take away. If even just 5 minutes a day of focused, sweet spot practice can genuinely, profoundly reshape your brain circuitry, what small, consistent effort will you choose to make starting today, starting now? To build the talent, the skill, the ability that you desire most, we really encourage you to apply these powerful insights from the Little Book of Talent. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.